That's probably my part of the process that baffles most people because they, in typical business, you're like, well, wait, why would you want competition? Why would you want to compete with other people? Shouldn't we be looking for these, quote unquote, blue ocean products or these brands that don't have competition? Wouldn't we make more money selling those? And my response to those people is, well, yeah, sure. I mean, there's money to be made, but in general, if somebody else is selling a product, they're not going to be losing money on that product or they wouldn't be selling it. So that's kind of the thought process is, well, let's just piggyback on the work that other people have already done. Other people have already found these products. Other people are already selling these brands. Why don't we just sell them too?
Welcome back to the show, Disruptors. I'm your host, Aaron Hale, and this is Point of Impact. Are you interested in making 6, maybe even 7 figures wholesaling products on Amazon? Corey Ganim is doing it to the tune of $3.2 million in sales, and he's here today to share how he does it. He explains the difference between wholesaling, online arbitrage, private label, drop shipping, and why he prefers wholesaling. Then he goes soup to nuts, cradle to grave, step by step, every bit. He's sharing on his process from picking the right products, how he knows those products are going to sell, what prices he needs to set them, and what prices he needs to get them from the supplier to make those profit margins he needs. Then how he finds the suppliers and negotiate those prices. And then inventory control, shipping, fulfillment. On the sales side, how he actually manages to get them into the customer's hands, getting into the buy box, that Amazon version of SEO. When you click the buy now box or buy now button, how he makes sure that it's him you're actually buying it from. The size of his team. It's surprising how small his team is for the type of volume he's really doing. And a whole bunch more. In just a moment, he's going to break it down like a shotgun. And there's a ton of value, all for you today for the low, low price of free. That's right, everybody. This episode is completely free. So you should subscribe and save right now. Do it now before you forget. And while you're at it, give the show a thumbs up, 5 stars, leave it a review, share it with somebody else. You have my personal satisfaction guarantee. If you're not completely satisfied, you can return this episode. No questions asked. I'm sure you're going to love it. And of course, I had a great time talking with Corey. So without further ado, Corey Ganim. Corey, welcome to Point of Impact.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to chopping it up with you here.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I am so intrigued by what you do because I've been interested in this for a long time. I've got a e-commerce site. My wife and I have a fudge company, a chocolate company, but I've always been intrigued with the whole Amazon marketplace, wholesale model. And I know back, it was in 2017, 18, 19, it was starting to get really popular. The advent of Alibaba and how a whole bunch of cheap crap just flooded the market. But
Right. There's a lot of that.
yeah, but there were also a lot of people started talking about how to set up these Amazon stores. But it was just, I don't know. There's so much, like Amazon's like this huge universe full of different ways. So why don't first, can you tell me how you got into started in on this path to Amazon wholesaling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of give you abbreviated rundown of how I got here. Okay. So this is, if we rewind 7 years, so right now it's August of 2024, rewind to about January of 2017, right? So during January of 2017, I'm a senior in college. Graduation is coming up that May. Luckily, I already had a full-time job locked down at the time, but I wasn't starting my full-time job until 2 months after graduation. So really, I had essentially a 2 month gap to fill between graduation and when I'm starting this job. And so I, probably like you, am the type of person who doesn't do very well sitting still for long, right? I've always got to be moving. I've always got to be working on something. Just kind of hanging out and doing nothing for 2 months really wasn't an option for me. So it was around January of my senior year where I start researching different side hustles, different business models, really just different ways to make money online. And I stumbled upon the whole selling on Amazon business model, right? And there are a bunch of different ways to sell on Amazon. I'm sure we'll get into a few of those during the course of this interview. But one of the ways that resonated with me early on was flipping used books on Amazon, right? And what drew me to flipping used books is the fact that you could buy these books for 25 cents, a dollar, $2 from thrift stores and from other kind of low cost sources. And some of these books, especially these nonfiction books or even some of these textbooks, can sell for 20, 50, $100+ at a time. So the ROI on used books is massive. And me, as a college student, right, completely broke at the time, not much capital to invest in the business, this made a lot of sense for me, right? So right after graduation, I remember I graduated on May 20th, 2017, and I think it was on May 22nd, 2017, that I started driving around to all the thrift stores in my town, which was Greensboro, North Carolina. That's where I'm from, and started sourcing used books to then turn around and flip on Amazon. So again, to kind of fast forward through the story a bit, I did the whole used books thing for about 2 months up until I moved to Chicago to start my full-time job. When I was in Chicago, I didn't have a car, so I wasn't really able to keep going around to thrift stores and continue selling used books because that's how I was sourcing them, was by going to thrift stores. So I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, okay, if I want to keep doing this Amazon thing, I've got to find another way to do it, which led me to discover online arbitrage. Now, online arbitrage is the simple process of buying products from websites, other retailers like Walmart, Target, Dick's Sporting Goods, etc., and then turning around and flipping those products on Amazon, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
did online arbitrage for about a year and a half until I eventually discovered wholesale, which is my current business model, which I know we're going to get a lot deeper into. And wholesale is very similar to arbitrage, except the difference is that with wholesale, instead of buying from other retailers, we're now buying either directly from the manufacturer or we're buying from large authorized distributors in much larger quantities and much larger dollar amounts. So that's kind of my journey as far as how I got to where I am today. And I'm happy to kind of drill into any step of the process.
So maybe you can give me a better definition or the differences between, say, arbitrage, wholesale, private label, resale, because I think there's uh, a lot of confusion there. I know
Yep.
I can get confused sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I can break that down for you. So really we mentioned three of the main three business models for selling on Amazon are private label, arbitrage, and wholesale. Right? So let's dig into private label first. So private label is a business model that most people are probably the most familiar with, probably because it's the one that's most touted by, the Instagram gurus and these people pushing courses. And private label is a fantastic model, but it's not beginner friendly and it involves a lot of risk. Because with private label, you're essentially creating a brand new brand from scratch, getting a product created typically overseas in China, creating the branding, creating the marketing, doing all these things up front, investing a lot of time and money up front, and then launching that new brand on Amazon, hoping that it catches fire and hoping that it sells well, right? So with private label, you're creating a brand new brand from scratch and you're having to launch it from zero to, however much in sales you want to do. So that's private label. Now, the second most popular business model is what I was kind of alluding to earlier, is simply called arbitrage, right? And now arbitrage is similar to wholesale, but the difference is that with arbitrage, you're buying from other retailers, like I said, like a Target,
Mm-hmm.
like a Walmart, like a Dick's Sporting Goods, and then you're turning around and flipping on Amazon. But the way that you make your money with arbitrage is that you're able to stack all kinds of discounts on top of each other to get products at crazy low prices. So I'll give you an example. So I have friends that do arbitrage full time, and a lot of them like to buy from, let's just say, Kohl's.com, right? So let's say they're on Kohl's.com, they find a pair of, let's just say, Nike socks that they want to flip on Amazon. Well, maybe at Kohl's regular retail price, there's no profit to be made. But what my friends are doing is they're finding, let's just say, a discounted gift card, right? Where they're able to buy a Kohl's gift card at 10% off the retail value. So right there, they're getting 10% off. Next, they're using a cashback website that might be giving another, let's just say 7% off, right? Another 7% cashback. So right there, you're at 17% off of retail. Next, they're going to be using, let's say, a cashback credit card that gives them another 2%. And then let's just say Kohl's is running a 20% off site-wide sale. So now they're getting a total of, let's just say, 39% off in this for this example. You see what I mean? So that is how you make your money with arbitrage. You're able to stack all of these little discounts one on top of the other to get products that, normally you might buy for $40 for, let's just say, $20. And that's where you make your profit on Amazon.
Gotcha.
Right? And then lastly, we have wholesale, right? Which I said is my business model, which is similar concept to arbitrage, except instead of buying from retailers and instead of having to stack all these discounts one on top of the other, we're just going straight to the source, whether it's directly to the manufacturer or to a large distributor, and just buying in larger quantities and being able to make our money that way because we're buying at wholesale pricing instead of having to buy at retail and then stack a bunch of discounts to get better pricing. Does that make sense as far as the difference between the three?
Absolutely. Yeah. What I really want to get into is how you make this contact with distributors, the brands, the manufacturers. But first, how do you find a product to sell? Like, is this something you have like a third party tool to use? Is it just going on Amazon and finding something that's already selling? How do you decide what you're going to sell?
Great question. Great question. And so you mentioned third-party tools, right? There's probably 100 plus Amazon software tools out there that could help you with your research process. The one that I like to use, it's called Smart Scout. And Smart Scout is basically a very big Amazon data tool, and it'll let you poke into different categories, different subcategories, different niches, and kind of extract some of these brands that are selling well on Amazon that appear to be reseller friendly, meaning other people are already selling these brands, which means that they're probably making money, right? If they're the ones selling the brands, they're probably making money, which means we probably can too. You see what I mean? So that's kind of my thought process is I like to find brands that other people are already selling because if there's competition, that means they're making money. So competition in this case is a good thing. And then it's really a very simple process. I either just cold call the brand and ask for a wholesale account, or I look for a distributor in my area that carries that brand. And then I just call that distributor and tell them that I want to buy that brand. So at the end of the day, it's a very simple business model. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance to it, and we can go as deep as you want.
So that's interesting. You're looking for products and brands that have competition.
Exactly. And that's probably my part of the process that baffles most people because they, in typical business, you're like, well, wait, why would you want competition? Why would you want to compete with other people? Shouldn't we be looking for these, quote unquote, blue ocean products or these brands that don't have competition? Wouldn't we make more money selling those? And my response to those people is, well, yeah, sure. I mean, there's money to be made selling brands or selling products that might be up and coming or that most people might not have found out about. But in general, if somebody else is selling a product, they're not going to be losing money on that product or they wouldn't be selling it. So that's kind of the thought process is, well, let's just piggyback on the work that other people have already done. Other people have already found these products. Other people are already selling these brands. Why don't we just sell them too? Right? Because there's over 2 million brands on Amazon. And it's really not that hard to find, 5 to 10 that you can sell that are profitable that end up making up your entire business.
So it's you're looking for proof of concept.
Exactly, exactly. That's a great way to put it, Aaron. The fact that there's competition for a given product or for a given brand is in and of itself proof of concept. So that's a much better way of saying what I was trying to say, I guess.
All right. So, is there a certain price point you're looking for, a certain type of product, and then how do you know what to buy it for? What to sell it for?
Yeah, so in terms of price point, in terms of what type of product we're looking for, so my business is a little unique. We tend to sell products that are at a higher price point. So our average sale price might be 30, 40, 50 plus dollars, whereas the average seller is usually selling products that are between, 15 to $20. And the reason that I target those more expensive products is because there just tends to be more margin in more expensive products, right?
Mm.
Simple as that. As far as the types of products or maybe the category of product that we like to sell, we really are category agnostic for the most part. My motto is if it makes dollars, it makes sense. So sometimes we sell tools, we sell a lot of disposable shaving razors, we'll sell water filters, right? We sell just about any and everything that we can get from a legitimate supplier with a good supply chain and at a good price, right? And then we use, again, as always, third party tools to analyze the profitability of each product. And typically, a good rule of thumb is if you're able to buy a product at half of the sale price, right? So if your cost of goods is roughly 50%, then typically you're going to be able to make a profit.
Is there some sort of a formula you use for the measuring the margin and making sure you're going to come out with a profit there? I mean, besides just the purchase price, I'm sure there's other expenses, holding costs, of course, your own expenses. So, how do you know what is a good price?
Yeah, and you're right, right? There's much more that goes into it than simply your purchase price because again, Amazon's going to want to take their cut. You've got Amazon fees, you've got shipping fees, you've got, depending on who is actually prepping your products and, sending them in, you've got additional fees there. So that tool that I mentioned earlier, Smart Scout that I use to find the brands that I want to sell, Smart Scout also has actually a free Chrome extension that will kind of crunch those numbers for you, right? They will take into account the Amazon fees and then you just enter in your overhead, right? So if your shipping costs, all of your individual costs, and then Smart Scout will then give you your projected profit based on the current market price of that product. So it's never a perfect science. It's always you're always kind of making a judgment call based on the market and where it's headed. But in general, with experience and with time, these predictions get pretty accurate and you find that you'll make money on most of the stuff that you're buying if you're doing your research and crunching your numbers properly.
Okay, so you found some products, you've done your research, you know what it sells for, and you know what price point you want to buy it. Do you how do you find these brands? How do you make contact and make this purchase?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, right? Everybody thinks that there's some, mystical science or some secret process for contacting these brands and getting in touch with them and getting them to do business with you. And honestly, Aaron, at the end of the day, people are going to hear this and think like, wait, it's that simple. It's like my process is literally I Google the brand name, I find their website, I find a phone number on their website, and I call them. And I try to get in touch with somebody in sales, right? Because typically somebody in sales is going to be incentivized to sell me product. So if I cold call a brand, which I've done many times, and I have videos on my YouTube channel of me cold calling brands, I'll cold call them and just say, hey guys, my name is Corey Ganim. I own a retail business. I'm based here in Charlotte, North Carolina. You guys have some great products. In fact, I'm specifically interested in products X, Y, and Z. I'm looking to make a large bulk purchase, wanted to be put in touch with somebody there in sales that covers my Charlotte territory, right? Somebody that would be my rep in my area. And so when you call them up and lead with that line, especially when you're specific about the exact products that you want to buy, in their mind, they're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is a B2B customer. He's ready to place a large order. He knows what he wants. Let me route him over to, let's say, Joe in sales, right? And get him taken care of. So it pretty much is that simple. Now, you're going to run into a lot of resistance. There's going to be objections. There's going to be roadblocks. But that is the gist of the process, Aaron, at the end of the day.
No, I like that specificity. Uh, I know, yeah, a lot of people, especially in sales, they get really turned off at people who are vague. Yeah, because it's a waste of their time.
Exactly.
It's almost like you're creating work for them. You got to ask. They got to ask you follow up questions like, "What do you want?" You know. Uh, so okay, yeah, and I mean, these are imagine brands that are already doing volume. There are other wholesalers out there, and maybe they have distributors. How do you get the that right price point? How do you convince them that you're someone they should be doing work with?
And that's a great question, right? So it comes down to just simply educating them on what it is that you need to be successful, right? Because let's just say, for example, if I cold call a brand and they're interested in doing business with me, and maybe they even send me over their pricing, right? And I'm analyzing their pricing, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, this is just isn't quite what I need, right? If I could get, let's say, an extra 10% discount or even a 5% discount, then this works, but I've got to get that additional discount to make it work. Then I'll just simply call up my sales rep and shoot him straight. I'll say, hey, man, listen, you sent over the pricing. I appreciate that. I love what you guys have and I'm ready to buy. However, in order for me to make my numbers work, you're quoting me at, let's just say $20 a unit. I've got to be at 18 a unit or I'm not going to make any money, right? So I want to buy 500 units. In fact, I could put a purchase order on your desk today for 500 units, but I've got to be at $18. So what can we do to make this work, right? How can we push this order through? And I always like asking those open-ended questions, Aaron, and I know you have sales experience, right? I know you do stuff in real estate, so you know how that game is played. But it's as simple as kind of dangling that carrot in front of them and saying, hey, man, like I'll put a commission in your pocket today, but you've got to kind of meet me where I'm at. So let's work together to make that happen. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Is there a target profit, like a net gain you're looking for? I know you just said you're looking to purchase at wholesale prices of 50% of the sale price, but there's you have your expenses. So what's the when you're looking at this on selling on Amazon, what's the target profit margin?
Great question. And this is the question that everybody asks, right? Because a lot of times they'll see these Amazon sellers putting up these huge sales months, right? Or these doing these big revenue numbers. And everybody's question is, well, what's the margin, right? How much are they actually making? So in my business, and everybody's criteria is slightly different,
Mm-hmm.
but in our business, we target a gross margin of anywhere from 12 to 15% on average, right? So that's kind of the gross margin that we're shooting for. Our average ROI, return on investment, is typically about 25%. So, with those two factors considered, as long as a product meets that criteria, we're making roughly a 25% ROI. We're making at least a 12% gross margin. And then as long as we're making at least about $1.50 or $2 in profit per unit, then that product meets our criteria and we'll go with it. Because Aaron, the big thing about Amazon as well is that it is in wholesale specifically, our business model, it is a volume game,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are here to move huge volumes and it's just not realistic to expect, 20, 25, 30% margin because, we'll take a 12% gross margin if I can move, let's say 2,000 units a month and make $2 in profit per unit. You see what I mean? So that's a kind of a limiting belief that a lot of people come into this business with is, I'm going to be making these huge margins, when in reality, they've got to be willing to sacrifice a little bit of margin in order to do some of the volume that a lot of people are doing.
Well, it's high volume for the smaller margin, or you could go hunting through the thrift store racks for 50-cent books,
Right.
but
Exactly.
you're
No,
trading your
it's
time and
the
effort.
question of, right. And that's sorry to cut you off, but you're kind of alluding to, I think what I was going to say here is that it's a game of, it becomes, would you rather take the fast nickel or the slow dime? Right. And personally, because it's a capital intensive business, because, sometimes we're taking on debt to fund the purchase of inventory. fast nickel is going to be the better route 9 times out of 10 when it comes to this business.
Okay, so you found the right product, the right brand, and you've agreed on price. So you've got procurement there. Do you take actual control? Do you hold inventory yourself, or where does it go? You make the purchase, and what happens from there?
Yeah, so we absolutely do, right? So we don't drop ship, which, in drop shipping, you're typically not taking ownership of the inventory. It's just when a customer buys from you, you're drop shipping that order from your supplier to the customer, which is not what we're doing. So we are buying the inventory, we're paying for it up front. Sometimes we're getting terms with our suppliers, so that way we don't have to pay them for, 15 or 30 days. But in general, we're paying up front, we're taking possession of that inventory, and typically our supplier is shipping it to what's in our world is called a prep center, right? A prep center is just a fancy word for an outsourced warehouse. That's all it is. So the workflow looks like we place an order with our supplier ships it to our prep center, and then our prep center receives it and then labels each individual unit and then ships everything in bulk at once to Amazon. And then once Amazon receives it, that's when it goes live for sale within our account. And then a customer can buy from us and Amazon will ship each individual order to our customers. Does that make sense? And that's how our inventory is able to qualify for Prime, right? Because if Amazon is the one controlling the fulfillment experience, Amazon can guarantee that it's going to get to the customer in 1 or 2 days. Whereas, Aaron, if I'm shipping each individual order to my customers, Amazon has no way to guarantee that I'm going to get it to them in 1 or 2 days. Therefore, it would not qualify for Prime if I was the one shipping each individual unit. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that's a great lead into the flip side. We talk about the logistics and the procurement part, the acquisition part, and then how about the distribution, the disposition, the sales side. So, how are you creating a new listing? Are you creating a new site page, sales page on Amazon? And how do you stand out among these other wholesalers?
And that's a great question. And so I'll use kind of the eBay versus Amazon model to illustrate this concept, right? Because your first question was, well, hey, are you creating brand new listings for these products? Are you kind of just throwing them out there and hoping people will buy? So no, we're actually piggybacking on the existing listings for these products. So I'll give you an example of that. So Aaron, if you were to go on Amazon right now and type in, let's just say Oral-B toothbrush, right? You're going to find hundreds of different Oral-B toothbrushes, but each individual Oral-B toothbrush model has one listing, right? So if you were to click on that one listing, it's all for the same Oral-B toothbrush product, but there might be, let's say 20, 30, 50 or more sellers on that listing. You see what I mean? So one listing, one product, but all the sellers selling that product are on the same listing. Versus like an eBay type marketplace, where if I were to sell that same Oral-B toothbrush on eBay, I would be creating a brand new listing. Because if I were to type that Oral-B toothbrush into eBay, I would find it, but I would find 200 different listings from 200 different sellers with 200 different titles and 200 different descriptions. Amazon just consolidates all of those offers under one singular listing, if that makes sense. And so the next question, which kind of leads into your next question, is, well, okay, well, if that's the case and I'm competing with, let's just say 50 other sellers on one individual listing, how do I differentiate? How do I make sales? Well, the key to making sales on Amazon is by getting what's called the buy box. So Aaron, I'm sure your audience has done this as well, right? Where you go onto Amazon and you go to buy a product or you go to add it to cart, right? When you click that add to cart button or that buy now button, that is what's called the buy box. And you'll notice that when you do that, there is a specific seller that is in that buy box. So for example, it might say, add to cart, this product is sold by Corey Ganim and fulfilled by Amazon. So that means Corey Ganim is in the buy box. And the way that you win the buy box is through a couple of factors. Now, Amazon has actually never come out and said, hey, this is how you win the buy box. because it is part of their proprietary algorithm that they will never share. But it's generally accepted by most Amazon professionals that the way to win the buy box is to have your offer be Prime eligible, right? Which is why we ship all of our stuff to Amazon so that it qualifies for Prime,
Mm-hmm.
as well as having the most competitive pricing, right? Which is typically just the lowest price. And in order to kind of maintain that lower price, we use what's called a repricer. So it's a tool that automatically updates our pricing across our entire catalog 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that we stay competitive and we remain in the buy box as long as possible.
Okay, so there are two levers to pull there for the most part, give or take. I mean, you've got the Prime shipping doing the Amazon fulfillment and the
Yep.
price. Get to the price in just a second, but why send it to them to fulfill versus uh, what is it by
Merchant
vendor?
fulfilled, yeah, like fulfilled by merchant is what that's called. So that's kind of the two different scenarios, right? So you've got FBA, which stands for fulfilled by Amazon, which is what we do, right?
Hmm.
Where we send all of our inventory to Amazon and Amazon fulfills each individual order. And then you've got what's called FBM, or fulfilled by merchant. And that is when I post my product for sale on Amazon. I am the one holding my inventory. And when a customer buys from me, I ship that individual order to that customer, right? So you're asking, well, why would we do one versus the other, and which scenario does it make sense? So it really makes sense to do FBA, right? To send most of your inventory to Amazon. I'd say most of the time FBA makes sense because when you do FBA, that's what allows your units to qualify for Prime. Amazon can guarantee a customer it's going to get it to them in 1 or 2 days. You're going to get more buy box as a result. And typically you can charge higher prices if your stuff is Prime eligible. Now, there are scenarios where selling FBM, right, fulfilling those orders yourself makes more sense. And typically it's going to be for products that are heavier or bulkier or cost you a lot of money to ship to Amazon upfront, because obviously Amazon charges you to do that, as well as certain products that are just very high volume, right? So, for example, right now we're recording this on August 14th. We're kind of in the thick of back to school season. And I know a lot of guys that do really well selling school supplies FBM, because a lot of these guys, they're doing arbitrage, which we discussed earlier. So they might go to Target and buy 20 packs of, let's say, Sharpies on clearance from Target, get them at a really good price, list them on Amazon FBM, and because these Sharpies are selling so quickly, Aaron, by the time they get home from Target, they've already made 10 sales. You see what I mean? Because all they do is throw the FBM listing up on Amazon. They make the sales really quickly. They can pack those up and just ship them out to their customers. Whereas if they would have listed those same products FBA, it might take them another week or two to get them to Amazon, get them checked in, and then make those sales. Does that make sense?
Is FBA the only way to qualify for Prime? Can you qualify for Prime with FBM?
So, very good question. So, there actually is a program called Seller Fulfilled Prime that you can enroll in, right? And so, this is definitely more of a high level tactic, because in order to qualify for Seller Fulfilled Prime, you're basically telling Amazon, hey, Amazon, I want you to give me the Prime badge, even though I'm going to be the one fulfilling these orders, right? So Amazon makes you adhere to very strict shipping guidelines. So, like, for example, if you miss the 2 day delivery window, like, a handful of times, they revoke that privilege. And doing seller fulfilled Prime really only makes sense for huge mega sellers that have multiple warehouses in different parts of the country, where they can guarantee that a customer is going to get that order within 1 or 2 days. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I only ask because I'm sure having Amazon do all the fulfillment is an added fee. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
you've got
You
the
pay for
added
everything
benefit.
around here.
Yeah, you've got the added benefit of the Prime and qualifying for the buy box, of course, versus the added expense of having them do more of the labor for you. But
Exactly.
but okay, so qualified, one lever, one check box, box checked for the buy box. What about pricing? If everybody once to qualify for this buy box pole position, right? They qualify for Prime by FBA, and then what about pricing? It just seems like you're going to just continuously undercut each other until nobody's making any money.
Yeah, and it's funny because I knew that you were leading there with that question. And it's a perfectly legitimate question, right? Because that makes perfect sense. It's like, well, okay, if I'm competing with 50 other people and we're all selling the same product and we're all using an automated repricing tool that's automatically adjusting our pricing, wouldn't we just undercut each other by a penny until, nobody's making any money and the price just completely tanks? So sometimes that does happen, right? Sometimes there are sellers who maybe they're newer or maybe they just don't know what they're doing and their repricer is just simply not set up correctly. So it's like, you look at the price today and it's at $20 and you look at it tomorrow and it's at $15 because they've just been constantly undercutting everybody and completely kill the price, right? That does happen, but it's not super common because most sellers, especially ones that are using a repricer, there's essentially guardrails that you can put in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. So most higher end premium repricing tools will not simply undercut, right? They will kind of adjust your price within a range that you set. And as long as you set your range to be reasonable, making sure that your minimum price isn't like crazy unprofitable and making sure that your maximum price is realistic, it will kind of price in between that range. So that way you're not just undercutting everybody for the sake of winning the buy box. You're making sure the listing doesn't die and, everybody's kind of making some sales in that case.
So that's great. It's a dynamic pricing tool. We
Exactly. Yep.
we use something similar with our actually very similar with our short-term rentals. Uh,
Oh yeah. Very similar concept. I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, Price Labs, AirDNA. But okay, so do you once you still you've got multiple wholesalers, these merchants that are selling the same product, same brand, and they've qualified, they pulled the same levers, and they're even using the same pricing tool. You get is the buy box rotate? How do you keep the how do you stay at the top of the page?
Yeah, so you nailed it. The buy box rotates. That's exactly what that's how we refer to it within the industry, right? Is well, hey, is the buy box rotating, right? How well is the buy box rotating? Is everybody on this listing that's priced competitively, are they all getting sales? Typically, right, if everybody's using a repricer and it's a normal product, then that is the case. It's going to rotate relatively evenly among anybody who's priced competitively and anybody who's a prime seller. And that's pretty much it. And then it's just a matter of letting the inventory sell, right? Just kind of kicking back and letting Amazon fulfill those orders.
I have noticed going back to when you were talking about doing a search for was the Oral-B uh, toothbrush. I have noticed when you do the search results, you look, there are very similar results listings. Uh, they may be not, maybe the same product, maybe not. Maybe this is one of those private label things, but I see, so to speak, the title names are identical.
Hmm.
It is that what's going on there? It sounds to contrary to what you've been saying here.
Yeah, so a lot of time because Amazon is such a big marketplace, Amazon's catalog has, I mean, I think 100+ million products. Like there are hundreds of millions of individual listings on Amazon. And bottom line, there are duplicates, right? There are going to be duplicate listings that, maybe somebody randomly created years ago and it's just still within Amazon's catalog. It hasn't been cleaned up. Sometimes other sellers have made bundles of, let's just use that Oral-B product as an example. Sometimes sellers will bundle an Oral-B toothbrush with, let's just say, Crest toothpaste, right? So it might have a very similar title, but inherently it's a different product because it includes that toothpaste as well. And then other times there are just other listings for the same product, but it's for a different quantity, right? So it might be the same title, same product, but one of the listings is for just one toothbrush, and one listing is for, let's say, a pack of 6,
Gotcha.
right? So it's pack size is oftentimes like one of the reasons you see some of these duplicates.
Okay, so what is without this kind of volume, what does your team look like?
Yeah, so I keep a pretty lean team, and most people are surprised when I tell them this, but I have 2 employees. They're both based in the Philippines. One of them is my head of operations. She pretty much runs the show. She's been with me for coming up on 5 years now, and she knows the business inside and out. Her name is Griselda. And then we have an admin named Ralph, who his main job is simply to support Griselda, right? His job is to free her up. She delegates a lot of the just kind of her admin day to day stuff to Ralph, and he gets the ball rolling on that stuff. And then I'm just there to kind of make sure Griselda is pointed in the right direction as far as what we're buying, what we're replenishing, and also what we're not doing, right? Half the battle is deciding what not to do and what not to buy and what not to focus on, as you know, right? That's half the battle in any business, really.
And how did you find these employees in the Philippines? Was there some kind of a service or a site?
Yeah, so I actually use a website called onlinejobs.ph, which is essentially a job board for Filipino employees who are looking for remote talent. And so I found both of them through onlinejobs.ph through a lengthy hiring and vetting process. And just as a side note, too, for anybody that is interested in like how I specifically find virtual assistants for my Amazon business, I've got an episode of my podcast, which is called the Amazon Wholesale Podcast. I believe it's episode 26 of the Amazon Wholesale Podcast, where I sat down with a buddy of mine who is a VA expert. This guy has VAs running his entire life, and we dig into the really nitty gritty details on hiring VAs, how to use them in your Amazon business, that type of stuff. So if that's a topic that interests you, I would check out that episode because I'm very much into like that topic as well. I love virtual assistants. I think they're fantastic.
That's definitely a tangent I could easily go into.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And that's how actually I think you got in touch with me is I think someone on your team reached out on behalf of you. And I was right away, I was like, oh, I love this. Like he's got a system in place. He's got somebody doing the outreach. Like let's do it.
I tell people I'm the blindest person with shiny object syndrome. I need a task manager. I need that
Right.
operations person, executive assistant that keeps me on point and makes sure every email gets answered. Yeah, Ella's been a godsend. Uh,
Yep.
so you've got your team, and of course you're keeping costs down by hiring overseas, but because this is a margin game and it's a tight margin with volume, how are you keeping costs down in other ways?
So one of the ways in which we're doing that is we have a lot of our suppliers actually ship straight to Amazon for us. So you know how earlier I mentioned that typical workflow is we buy from the supplier,
Hmm.
supplier ships to the prep center, and then the prep center then ships to Amazon. So obviously one of our biggest expenses is shipping and then is also
Hmm.
paying the prep center to then forward to label the products and then forward them onto Amazon. So what we've started to do is we've started to go to some of our suppliers and say, "Hey guys, would you mind just shipping our orders straight to Amazon so we can kind of cut out a step, save some time and save some money in the process?" And we found that a lot of our suppliers were perfectly willing to do that. When we asked them that question, they're like, "Yeah, sure, we can do that, right? No problem." So simply by cutting out one additional step in the really supply chain process, it saves us a lot of time and a lot of money, to the tune of thousands of dollars per month in savings having to skip that step a lot of times.
Shipping. That's one of the things I dread when it comes to, and I'm with Tim Ferriss. This is dating myself a little bit, but the 4-hour work week. When he was talking
Oh
about
yeah,
if he had to do it over again, he wouldn't do consumable products.
right. Physical products.
I'm right there with him. Just because shipping food, uh, it's there's especially if you have to ship it a couple times before it gets to the end user, to the customer. Oh, it's awful. But it can wipe out a margin real fast with
Oh
you
yeah.
know, one extra stop. So that makes sense. Uh, and do you have a method for, say, your finance, keeping all your numbers squared away? Like for me, again, spreadsheets are it's like playing Minesweeper for me.
Yeah.
So I need to keep things easy and automated. Do you have a method for making sure that all your numbers are where they're supposed to be?
Yeah, so we do. So we use a pretty simple, we call it just our financial dashboard, and it's just a simple Google sheet that our team updates every morning. And it's got a couple of key numbers. So one of those is how much cash do we have on hand? Another one is how much money does Amazon owe us? So essentially our accounts receivable. Then we have our accounts payable, as well as our credit card balance and our credit line balance. And so we obviously add up the assets there, cash on hand plus what Amazon owes us, minus accounts payable, minus credit card bill, minus credit line balance to give us what we call our spending power, right? So we know that if, let's just say our spending power is, X, well, we can't spend more than X on inventory or we're going to be on paper underwater, right? So that's kind of what keeps us between the boundaries of making sure we're continuing to reinvest and redeploying that cash flow into more profitable inventory while also not overextending ourselves and not doing anything that's going to cause me to lose sleep at night because we don't want to wake up one day and not have cash to pay the bills.
Hmm. Going back to uh, logistics and purchasing the product from the brand, uh, what was your first wholesale, and how much did you have to purchase? How What I'm getting is, where did you get started on the wholesaling, and what's it going to cost somebody to get their foot in the door?
Yeah, so great question. And I actually, so again, kind of just shameless plug for my podcast, but I did go very deep, like my first wholesale account, first thing I purchased, all the way up until the stuff I'm buying now. And I think it was episode like 62 of the Amazon Wholesale podcast. And that's where I actually started buying baby strollers. So that was the first brand I ever worked with, was a brand of baby products. We were buying high chairs, we were buying baby strollers, and those are the products that we started off with, right? And it all started as a result of a cold call. Like we were talking about earlier, all I did is I picked up the phone, I cold called the brand, I got to talking to a sales rep, we hit it off, and we became an authorized retailer of that brand. So simple as that. And as far as the budget required to start wholesale, typically you're going to want at least 5 to 10K in capital for inventory, right? That's in order to kind of have a solid foundation to get the ball rolling with wholesale. I do know people that have started with as little as, let's say, 3 to 5K. You can still make it work. But if you've got less than 3 to 5K, I would start with something like an arbitrage to build up that cash and then transition into wholesale.
Okay. And you said you've called up these manufacturers, the brands they're called distributors. Uh, I know arbitrage or drop shipping, that kind of thing, private label. It's very transactional. Is wholesaling, is this more of a relationship business? Uh, and it does, because when you're calling the distributors to ask them to sell you something for half retail price, um, do you have to build these relationships? Is it a network type thing?
Oh, that is 100% what it is, right? It is the definition of a relationship business. And so to be honest, Aaron, that's kind of what drew me to this business in the first place is I was in B2B tech sales as far as my corporate job is concerned back when I started selling on Amazon. And what really drew me to wholesale as a business model is it is the most similar to B2B sales because it is all about building rapport, building relationships, pounding the phones, following up, right? Because I'll be honest with you, I have relationships in place with my suppliers today that have taken me years to build. And I could give a brand new seller a list of all my best suppliers. And that brand new seller would get nowhere with those suppliers because they don't have the relationship, right? Because
Hmm.
they haven't built that rapport, because they haven't spent, who knows how much money with them over the course of years, because they haven't met them in person, done all the things that you have to do in a relationship type, B2B sales type business, so that's exactly what it is, right?
So, how many suppliers do you have? How many products do you sell? Is it? I know you have to do quite a bit of volume uh, per product, but do you have how many products do you carry?
Yeah. So in terms of how many, so I'll kind of give you like the breakdown of almost what the funnel looks like. So inside my CRM, I checked it earlier this week. We have, I think it's about 4,300 total suppliers inside that CRM. Some of those are brands, right, or the manufacturers. Some of those are distributors. But over the course of, since I guess 2019 is when I pivoted to wholesale, I've called a couple thousand suppliers. But of those few thousand that I've called, we're only actively working with 3 to 6, right? Because it really only takes a small handful of really solid suppliers to build a 7 or even 8 figure wholesale business on Amazon. And then from those 3 to 6 suppliers, we're carrying at any given time anywhere from 20 to maybe up to 60 to an upwards of 80 given SKUs at any time, right? So this kind of shatters the limiting belief that I think a lot of especially newer sellers have of, oh, I need to be working with 100 different suppliers, or I've got to carry 3,000 different products to make any good money in this business, when that's just not true. It only takes really 1 to 3 really good suppliers and 10 to 20 really good products to build a killer business. Obviously, the more you have, the better, but it doesn't take much, man. It really doesn't.
I know we talk about diversifying when we're buying stocks, right, and building that kind of portfolio. But diversification is just eliminating that single point of failure. So you spread out a little bit, but the more you spread out, the more you're just kind of mitigating uh, success as well. But uh, if you spread yourself too thin, have too many products, is it? I mean, is it having too many products? You're saying your sweet spot somewhere around 60. Uh, if you added, if you doubled that, tripled that, would that be an issue?
So it wouldn't be an issue. The only hard part about, well, not the only hard part, but one of the hardest parts about this business is simply keeping your best products in stock. So again, if I only have a team of 2 people, so if we've got, if our portfolio is only 60 products, and of those 60, maybe 15 make us 80% of our profit, right? Like the 80/20 rule in action, then the name of the game simply becomes keeping those 15 products in stock, right? If we can just keep those 15 products in stock, we're going to make 80% of our profit from that, and it's going to be great. Now, if we doubled the size of our portfolio to, let's just say, 120 different products, we would definitely make more money. We would do more revenue. All of our numbers would be up, but then the management of that would just be slightly more difficult, right? We might need to bring on a third team member to be able to effectively manage that inventory and make sure that we're stocking appropriate quantities of each of those products. So but the point you mentioned earlier, right, about you don't want to spread yourself too thin, but you also don't want that single point of failure. A caveat that I should add is that even though we're working with, let's just say, 3 to 6 main suppliers, we have backup suppliers for each of those main 3 to 6, right? So let's just say one of our main suppliers we buy a lot of tools from, right? A lot of tool products, a lot of tool brands. Well, even though the bulk of our business is with that one tool supplier, we have accounts with their top 2 to 3 competitors. So that way, if our main supplier ever says, well, hey, we can no longer give you this price, or hey, we no longer carry this brand, we're not back to square one. We simply go to their competitors that we already have a relationship with and say, hey, we were just spending X amount per month with XYZ distributor. We're now shifting that business to you guys. Let's talk, right? And I automatically have way more credibility because we have that existing relationship, and because I'm essentially bringing them business that was going to their competitor previously, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. If we've mentioned it quite a few times, going to distributors. Why not go straight to the brand every time and go to the manufacturer? Why are you dealing with distributors if you're trying to narrow that margin and reduce the number of uh, people, number of stops along the way?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And really the simple answer is because some of these, especially some of these big manufacturers and these big brands, they just won't deal with individual retailers, right? I like to use Procter and Gamble as an example because they're one of the biggest manufacturers out there. They have tons of different brands that all sell well on Amazon. But Aaron, the chances of me, Corey Ganim, as a retailer here in Charlotte, North Carolina, getting a direct account with Procter and Gamble isn't very likely. So what Procter and Gamble is going to do instead is they're going to tell me to go buy from one of their distributors because it's just so much easier for Procter and Gamble to sell to, let's just say, 200 different distributors around the country than it is and then those distributors then sell to, the tens of thousands of individual retailers that buy Procter and Gamble products. It's way easier for that to be the scenario than Procter and Gamble to sell directly to the tens of thousands of individual retailers that end up buying their products. So it's just a lot of the times with these bigger manufacturers, they almost force you to go through one of their distributors.
That makes perfect sense. And you're trying to cut out as many middlemen as you possibly can, but sometimes that it's about volume. I mean, of course, it's about volume, but it's I'm considering like farmer to grocery store to you've got distributor in the middle there, just getting it to the grocery
Yep.
store, getting it to the customer. That makes sense. Uh, for somebody who's looking to also to get started here, is there anything I missed that they should know about?
So I really feel like we hit on a lot of the main points. And so what I like to do and always trying to keep things simple, always trying to simplify the business is I've kind of broken down the concepts into just what I call the 5 pillars of Amazon wholesale. And we covered a lot of them, right? First one is finding suppliers. Pillar number 2 is contacting suppliers. Pillar number 3 is sourcing products. Pillar number 4 is shipping and logistics. And then pillar number 5 is leveraging virtual talent to scale. And we literally hit on all 5 of those, right, in some capacity. So we ran the gamut in general. Obviously, each of those can go into more detail. There's nuance to each step of the process. But if you know how to find suppliers, if you know what to say to them, if you know how to buy products, if you know how to handle the logistics, and if you can hire a virtual team, you're unstoppable, right? This business is your oyster.
All right. Well, then I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our audience. I think that's a perfect place to segue into our final segment, the countdown to impact, and that's uh, 3 books, 2 quotes or general rules of thumb, and 1 person who's made an impact in your life.
So yeah, and these are great because I love to read, right? I'm a big reader. So I'd say 3 books that really made an impact. The first one that comes to mind is Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. So for the listeners, a lot of the listeners have probably read his first book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is kind of the real estate investors' Bible, if you will, right? Something that gets a lot of people into that frame of mind. And Cash Flow Quadrant is his follow up to uh, Rich Dad Poor Dad. So it's a little bit more advanced, but the premise is simply build businesses that give you cash flow and use that cash flow to buy assets, right? Simple as that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of exactly what I'm trying to do. So that's the first book, Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. Second would be Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. That is a fantastic book on delegating and outsourcing. And then the third would have to be Traction by Gino Wickman. That is, I'm sure a lot of people on here have mentioned that book, but me personally, that's probably the most impactful business book that I've read because it was the first eye-opening book that I read about creating systems, having a scorecard, holding your team accountable to specific numbers and KPIs, Just a lot of really good stuff in that book. I reread it all the time.
Those are all great books. I love it.
Oh yeah.
Okay, 2 quotes.
So 2 quotes. So the first one that comes to mind is it goes something along the lines of you overestimate what you can accomplish in 1 year and you underestimate what you can accomplish in 5 years. Okay. And this was my exact experience with Amazon Wholesale. I remember when I started the business, I talking to my dad about it. I'm like, oh, we're going to do, $1 million in sales in year one. We're going to crush it. It's going to be great. Right. When in reality, we didn't do 1 million in sales in a single calendar year until I think year three. Right. It took us 3 years to hit that number in a single year. So I think most people underestimate what they can do in 5 years and they overestimate what they can do in one. And then second quote, so this isn't quite a quote, but just general principle or rule of thumb to live by is just keep things simple and be consistent, right? Every business at the end of the day can be boiled down to some pretty simple principles. And if you can grasp that foundation and just be ultra consistent in executing on those foundational principles, then it's hard to lose, right? Especially if you do the same thing for 2, 3, 5 years at a time. It really is hard to lose.
Great, great rules to live by. And one person that's made an impact in your life.
Yeah, one person, I would say my dad, right? He's been my business partner in this Amazon business. We started it together in 2019. He's been great, very motivational, always there in the background, cheering me on, making sure that we're on the right track. So I'd have to shout him out for that for sure.
Awesome. Well, Corey, I really appreciate your time. And if anybody wants to learn more, find you, get in contact, maybe just reach out and uh, learn a little bit more about Amazon wholesaling. Where do they find you?
So the best place by far, and I mentioned it a couple of times already, but that would just be my podcast, right? The Amazon Wholesale Podcast. That is on every platform, YouTube as well, where every Wednesday I sit down with successful wholesale sellers. I interview them and get their take on what's working, what's not working, etc. An episode that I would recommend people start out with is actually the one that came out today, right? It's episode 65 of the Amazon Wholesale Podcast, where we just talk about what's working for Amazon sellers in 2024. So this is a great episode, especially for people that are maybe newer to the business that want to get a feel for what it's like. We go deep on that episode today. And then aside from that, just YouTube, right? At Corey Ganim on YouTube. I've got tons, I think 568 videos last I checked on YouTube, all about Amazon wholesale. You're going to get a lot of good info there.
Awesome. And we'll get that all into the show notes. Well, Corey, I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing all that and have a great day.
Thank you, man. You do the same.